All right. I think one of the questions I get asked a lot is about this problem of evil. And I think I get asked it mostly because a lot of the people I'm dealing with are experiencing some form of evil and they want good answers. Why did this happen to my daughter? Especially if you're somebody who's a believer, the question becomes, well, then why would this happen to somebody who actually loves God? Who I've prayed to God about things. Why does this stuff happen to me? And so of all the objections we get related to Christianity and all the things that are declared by Christianity, one of the largest categories of doubt and skepticism comes from this problem of evil. Like, why would God allow evil? So I'm going to try to walk you through some of the answers I typically give. And I'll just warn you up front, if you're looking for like an easy answer to the problem of evil, you're probably not going to get it today. But I think I'm going to give you a very robust answer. But I am going to warn you, so I'll just warn you up front about this. This is a question and an answer that may not be helpful to some of you. And what I mean by that is that if you're somebody, we've all experienced evil in different ways. And sometimes it's criminal evil like I deal with. Sometimes it's just the evil of our natural evil of some sort. Like floods and earthquakes, and if we're in California, fires. So I'm going to just tell you up front, if evil is I'm different. I try to answer this question differently depending on the person I'm talking to. If you're somebody who's experienced evil and you're asking me like an objection, why would God allow evil? I need to know, first of all, what's the frame of reference that you have? Why are you asking that question? Have you experienced some kind of evil? Because if it's true that this is in your rearview mirror somehow, in other words, I've experienced evil in the past, there's a good chance people like that just need to be held. They don't need a philosophical answer to what is an emotional dilemma, right? So I'm not going to be able to hold you for this session. Instead, I'm going to give you philosophical answers, which I don't think are always that satisfying if evil's in your rearview mirror. If, however, evil is still out in front of you, it's in your windshield, like you haven't experienced this stuff yet, well, it turns out the more I can help you think about it before you experience evil, the more I will inoculate you from a bad experience of evil or how it might impact your view of God. So for those of you who haven't yet experienced the kind of evil you may someday experience, I think this will be very helpful. And I'm going to throw it to you in a way, it's from the last book we have out here with God's Crime Scene. It's just one chapter of that book. But I'm not going to use God's Crime Scene. Today I'm going to use this book. It's the Introduction to Fundamentals of Criminal Investigation, which is like a primer for most of us who do these kinds of jobs. And I'm going to teach you a little bit about Death Investigation 101, okay? Because I think you can make a case for God, and evil is not an evidence against God in that case. It's actually an evidence for God in that case. I just want you to see how it fits in the puzzle. So let's walk into a room together, a death investigation. Not every death investigation is a murder investigation. Not every kind of death is a murder. There's 4 ways to die. Only one of them is criminal. So if I walk into a room, for example, and I've got a guy who looks a lot like my son Jimmy, back before he was graduated from the academy, when he worked at, do you guys know what Trader Joe's is? Do you have Trader Joe's around here anywhere? Too bad for you losers, I'll tell you right now. Because Trader Joe's is amazing. We would starve to death if there was not a Trader Joe's in our neighborhood. So anyway, a dead guy laying face down presents you with a certain dilemma, but you don't really know what it is yet because all you have evidentially is a dead guy laying face down. So I can make a list of all the evidence in the room, and I can put the list over here. And over here I'll make a list of all the actual explanations for the evidence in the room. This is how we work any crime scene or death scene. So far, the only thing I have on the list of evidences side is I have a dead guy laying face down. So now how do I explain dead guys laying face down? Well, I'll make a list of every possible explanation for dead guys lying face down. And here's the first one. It could be a natural death. It could be an accidental death. He might have committed suicide. Or this could be a homicide, in which case I have to stay and work it. So the question is, which of these makes the best inference from the evidence I have so far? So look at this right now and tell me, what can I cross off? You can just shout it out. What can I cross off? Suicide? Well, okay, if he took too many pills intentionally, he would look like this. As a matter of fact, if he accidentally took too many pills, he would look like this. If he just tripped in something, this could be a natural. Or if I poisoned him with too many pills, he could look. Do you see how right now, based on what I have, I can't cross out anything? Everything's still in play. Let's change this scenario slightly. What if he's a dead guy laying face down, but now he's in a pool of his own blood, center torso? Would that change things? Pardon me, I think it would. By the way, I stole 2 cookies out of the Chick-fil-A boxes. So did anyone here get a Chick-fil-A box and is missing a cookie? Anybody get that? Okay, fine. I'll steal one more then after we're done here. Anyway, point is, this pool of blood would change things, and if we added it to our list of evidences, now, can I cross out anything? Now, remember, there's a difference between what's possible and what's reasonable. I don't care about what's possible. Possible doesn't count. The standard of proof is not beyond a possible doubt. You'd never prove anything. The standard of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a lower standard. So anything is possible, but not everything is reasonable. So I can say, well, look, it's possible that where can you bleed naturally center torso? It's possible, but it's not reasonable, so I think I can cross that one out. But until I roll them over, I really can't cross out anything else. Make sense? So let's change our scenario slightly. What if he's a dead guy laying face down in a pool of his own blood, but now he's got a single gunshot wound. It's a gunshot wound that is an exit wound in his back. There's a casing and a handgun. So let's put that on our list of evidences. What can I cross out? What can I cross out? Suicide? You don't think he can shoot himself there? By the way, it doesn't make any sense that he shoot himself there. Most of the suicides I go to are narcotics-based suicides. You can see all kinds of crazy stuff. I still can't cross out anything. He could have accidentally shot himself, he could have been murdered, or he could have committed suicide and have the exact same injury. So let's change our scenario slightly. What if he is a dead guy laying face down in a pool of his own blood with a single gunshot wound, and he's got a suicide note laying next to him? It's written in his own handwriting. That's his paper. That's his pen. The only DNA we have, skin cell transfer, and fingerprints on the paper are his. So now I'm going to add a suicide note to my list of evidences on this side. Now, what can I cross out? Yeah, I mean, he may have accidentally killed himself before he intended to kill himself, but it looks like he intended to kill himself, so this is going to come off. Now, it's clearly a suicide, right? Because we got a suicide note. So how many of you think we know the answer to this already? You're shaking your heads. There's a suicide note. How many say it's not a suicide? On the basis of what would it not be a suicide? You got a suicide note. It's in his own handwriting, in his own pen, his own paper. What? Somebody forced him to write it. Yeah, it's a forgery, because you've watched so much Criminal Minds, you think you know the answer to this. Which is a stupid show. Honestly, that is the dumbest show of all cop shows, I'll tell you right now. All right, let's change the scenario slightly. What if he's a dead guy laying face down in a pool of his own blood, and he's got a gunshot wound, and he's got a suicide note, but now, when we investigate it, we find out those aren't his handwriting. That's not his handwriting. That's not even his paper. We can't find that paper anywhere else in the house. As a matter of fact, there's only skin cell transfer. It doesn't come back to him. It's an unknown on the paper. That would change things, don't you think? What if in addition to this single gunshot wound, it wasn't a single gunshot wound that's an exit wound, but it was multiple gunshot wounds that were entry wounds? Would that change things? What if there were bloody footprints leading out of the house? Would that change things? I think so. You can tell this is a California murder right here. So we add these pieces of information, we collect this data, and then we ask the question, given this list of information, of data, evidence, what is the best explanation? It's really hard to shoot yourself in the back with your own gun multiple times and then walk out of the room in your own blood. So I can now reasonably pull this one off. Does that make sense? And we now know we have a suicide. I just taught you what we call abductive reasoning. Abductive reasoning, or making a most reasonable inference from evidence, okay? Reasoning to the most reasonable inference. There's lots of ways of saying it. There's also another skill here that I teach investigators. It's a little bit easier, so I'll just give it to you this way. I'm always trying to find a visual analogy that'll help you work a case. I call this an exercise in inside or outside the room. Here's what I always say. If I can explain everything that's inside the room by staying inside the room for an explanation, it's not a murder. Make sense? Let me make a visual for you. Let's take our guy in the room. We'll put him in a smaller room. We'll put him in this box. And now we'll play this game of inside or outside the room. If everything in the room can be explained by staying in the room, it's not a murder. So for example, if I said, okay, this is a handwritten note, but it's on paper that I find elsewhere in the room. It's a pen that's found elsewhere in the room. The only DNA transfer and the only fingerprints are from the guy who's inside the room. Well, now I can stay inside the room to explain the note. And it turns out that he owns that gun. It's registered to him. He usually keeps it in a safe in the corner of the room. I can now stay inside the room to explain the gun. And anyone can shoot themselves just once without any help from anybody else, and if that's all I had, well, I could even explain the single gunshot wound by staying inside the room. So now I've stayed inside the room for an explanation. This is going to be one of those three categories, either a natural and accidental, not going to be a natural, obviously, but it'll be an accidental or a suicide, because I can stay inside the room. On the other hand, if the better explanation is outside the room, so for example, turns out that doesn't have his fingerprints on it. It's an unknown. It's not his paper. I can't find that paper anywhere else in the room. It's not his pen. Well, now I got to figure out where that came from. The better explanation is outside the room. And it turns out that that's not his gun. And his friends say he's afraid of guns. He would never own a gun, and the registration's been scratched off. Well, now I got to figure out whose gun that is. I got to go outside the room. And it's kind of hard to shoot yourself multiple times in the back without any help from anybody else. And I also have footprints that lead outside the room. So now I've clearly got to go outside the room for an explanation. And because the best explanation for the stuff that's in the room is now a cause that's outside the room, this is now going to shift to a homicide investigation. Why? Because what we're doing here are simple intruder investigations. And intruders change everything. In fact, it's intruders that change death scenes, and they turn death scenes into crime scenes. No intruder? Probably not a crime scene. Make sense? Also, you might have some sense of curiosity about why somebody would kill themselves or how they could die accidentally, but once you know you have an intruder, that sense of curiosity better turn into a sense of urgency. Because the one show that actually gets this right is a show called The First 48. Pretty boring show. But it really highlights the fact that the first 48 hours are critical in any kind of murder investigation. The longer time goes by, the more time people have to destroy evidence, cover their trail. Make sense? Okay, I just taught you a skill set you can use when your kids get in trouble. Now, here's why I even bring this up. Because as a new investigator, I did three books on what it took for me to decide that Christianity was true. All the evidence inside the New Testament is from a book called Cold Case Christianity, which Tim mentioned. But I needed to know, is it reasonable to think that God even exists? Well, that's the book I'm talking about today. That's God's crime scene. And then finally, what is the evidence outside of the New Testament? That is person of interest. And I did this in about 9 months when I was working undercover, and I had a lot of time to kill. And so I just want to share with you why this matters. Why does this intruder investigation matter? Because what if the room under consideration is not a death scene, but is just the entire natural physical universe? Can I explain everything that's in the physical universe by staying inside the physical universe for an answer? That means I'm only allowed to cook with the stuff that's in the universe: space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry. But the problem is there are several attributes of the physical universe, like the fact that it has a beginning. And we know from science that the beginning has to be outside of space, time, and matter, because there is no space, time, or matter until the beginning of the universe. We're in a finite, limited universe that comes into existence from nothing. That's not a claim of the New Testament or the Old Testament, although it is, but it's a claim of science. Big Bang cosmology, the standard cosmological model. The problem, of course, that means that something has to cause anything that comes into existence has to be caused. Then your cause has to be outside of space, time, and matter. I'm already outside the room to begin with. We also are in a room that seems to be fine-tuned for the appearance of carbon-based life. And we got to explain why it's fine-tuned. Also, we're in a room that appears to have the origin of life. It has to be explained by how does life originate in a universe which has no life? Then when it does emerge, it appears to have the appearance of design. The information in DNA is hard to explain. under naturalism. Also, we are thinking about this using our minds, but minds are not available to us because they're immaterial realities and we're in a material universe. If the universe is entirely material, as atheists say, you have a brain, but you don't have a mind. A mind is an illusion. And if you don't have a mind that is governed freely by your free agency, then you also don't have free will. And most materialist atheists, like Sam Harris, the neuroscientist who Tim talked about a little bit, who also is an atheist and a philosopher, he denies the existence of both mind and free agency. He thinks both of those are illusions. And of course, you also have to kind of explain where transcendent objective moral laws come from. Interestingly, in the video we started with this morning where they were interviewing people about truth claims, is it objectively wrong for someone to murder? Well, I wouldn't do it. That's not what I asked. Is it objectively wrong? We could ask that in the Q&A later on. But finally, we have to explain evil. Everyone has to explain evil. Is this an evidence against God's existence? Or I actually think these 8 things cannot be explained by staying inside the room. I think all 8 of these things require an explanation that's outside the room. That means we've got an intruder. And intruder investigations should tip us off, right? Well, in this case, the intruder spans the entire known universe. And that's what I'm talking about in God's crime scene. I can tell you, when I did the God's crime scene, they wanted me to get rid of the name. It makes it sound like God has done something bad. I'm not saying I'm suggesting. I'm just suggesting you could investigate the universe as a crime scene to discover who caused it. So we go back to our analogy. We're going to flip it now. We're simply going to say, if we're investigating the universe instead of a death scene, well, we need evidence and explanations. There are 8 pieces of evidence. One of them is the problem of evil. And there are only 2 ways to explain this evidence. Either we stay inside the room, and it's just space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry, or we jump outside the room, and it's something outside of space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry. Does that make sense so far? I was just giving you a kind of a crash course. I teach this course at Biola. It takes me 18 hours to teach the course. You're getting it all in an hour, okay? So let's get after it. We're going to talk just in this last session about this one problem, the persistent presence of evil and injustice. This is a case from 1972 that we just solved in 2019. This is the guy who first confessed to it. This is my dad, by the way. He hates this picture because he looks ridiculous in that picture. Look at that tie. That's a 1972 tie right there. And look at this suit. He had 2 of these. He had a tan one and a brown one, both polyester. He would change the coat with the pants so it looked like he had 4 suits. Some days he'd have a tan coat and brown pants. Some days he'd have a brown coat and tan pants. Like no one's going to notice this, right? And look at this. He hates this picture because he thinks his butt looks really big right there. But look at it. It does look big. If you measure this dimension right here, this dimension from here to here, that is like a Weeble. Remember the Weebles that wobble but don't fall down? That's what it's like. That's actually just his gun. You just can't, he's right-handed, so you can't see that's his gun under his waistband. So anyway, this guy, we had a 10-year-old girl who was kidnapped on a holiday, who was murdered, brutal assault, and then she was murdered. Terrible things were done to her. This guy confessed to all of it, every sordid detail. None of that confession was true. He had some serious issues, but he stalled us for about 16 months, and this thing stayed open. I reopened it in 2003, I think. And we ended up solving it with DNA from genetics, from family ancestry DNA, 3 years ago. So it took us 16 years to solve it. And Dateline covered it. It was called The Murder of Terry Lynn Hollis. But I'm not going to call her Terry Lynn here, although it's now done. I call her Jackie in the book. So let's talk a look. The question her family has is, why, if there is a God, would he allow this horrific afternoon to happen to my daughter who was 10? Well, that's a hard question to answer. But like any case, it's not going to be based on one thing. It's going to be a kind of a cluster of details that make sense once they're assessed cumulatively. So for example, Jackie was the kind of person who would actually get into a stranger's car. And she did that day. Had she not got, this is why kids, we tell you not to get into strangers' cars. Had she not gotten into the car, been the kind of kid who would get into a car, she wouldn't have died. Also, on the day she was kidnapped, it was a busy holiday, and her family says, we're making dinner. I want you and your brother to play outside. Do not come back in this house for at least 3 hours. And they had no idea what she was doing for those 3 hours. They were not paying attention. Had it not been a holiday, and had she not been the kind of person who would get into a suspect's car, this would not have happened to her. So now I have two conditions that help to explain why this happened to Jackie. But I have to take time to explain both of those, don't I? It's not just that. It turns out the person who did this to her is probably somebody who had a disturbing upbringing of his own. Most pedophiles that I work have been victims as children themselves. If you're not the kind of person who's been a victim like that growing up, and you aren't on a holiday with somebody who would get into your car willingly, this wouldn't have happened. Now we've got three conditions that had to be met before this would happen. Also, he had to have a knowledge of our city, which was unusual, because this neighborhood was not one of those neighborhoods you could just drive down PCH and find it. You had to get off the road, go into some he had to know this neighborhood to get in and get out. If he isn't somebody who knows this neighborhood, doesn't have this kind of upbringing, and she's not willing to get in a car on a holiday, this doesn't happen. 4 things now. Of course, he has to have the kind of car he could utilize to do this. It took hours to actually execute. If he doesn't have the kind of car, doesn't know the neighborhood, it's not a holiday, and she won't get in the car, and he is not a pedophile himself, this doesn't happen. Do you see how it's becoming quite complex, isn't it? It's not just that. He had to have time, the kind of time in the day to do it, to know where to do it. She dropped her body in Ventura County. This is now how we explain this particular. Now, by the way, there are connectivity between these explanations. As the detective, I'm trying to figure out, what are the factors involved? How are they connected? And then who in the world would match all these factors? And there's interconnectivity here. It's not easy for me to even explain it to a jury years later. All of this, though, explains why this happened to Jackie. Does that make sense so far? My answer is almost always going to be cumulative. Why did this happen to Jackie? Well, do you have an hour? I'm going to try to explain it to you. Why do you think God exists? Well, do you have an hour? Because it's a cluster of ideas. I think it's all of these things most reasonably point to the existence of God. But then we have this problem of evil. By the way, when something points to a suspect, it's called inculpating evidence. If something is like an alibi for the suspect, though, or eliminates him or provides an alternative suspect that's better, that is called exculpating evidence. Is that what evil is? Is evil a piece of evidence that actually points away from the existence of a good, loving God? That's the question most of us have. Is that exculpating evidence? I actually don't think it is, but I'm going to show you the kind of classic argument. It's kind of repeated year after year from somebody named Epicurus, who puts it this way: is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he's not omnipotent. Right? If he's not able, he's not all-powerful. If you're all-powerful, you should be able. Is he able but not willing? Well, then he's malevolent. So if you're saying he's all-powerful and all-loving, well, if he's all-powerful, why wouldn't he stop it? He's got the power. And if he's all-loving, why wouldn't he be willing to stop it? He's not malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Why is there evil then, if he's both able and willing? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? So this is the classic ancient complaint based on the problem of evil. So I'm going to try to answer it for you tonight. But it's going to be a cumulative answer. Just like the answer for Jackie. There are a number of reasons why a good, loving God might allow evil to occur in his creation. And if you know this before it happens to you, you'll suffer through it a little less, in a little less severe way. Make sense? I want to introduce a couple concepts to you. First, you have to have an accurate view of eternity. It's also going to involve a proper reference for free agency and a definition of love. It's also going to be a role in character development. These are all the reasons why a good, loving God might allow any singular act of evil. And while it seems like a lot, it's going to go fast. So hold on. You ready? I'm going to send you this video, so just chill, okay? It's going to be okay. I'm going to send you the video with all 8 evidences for God, including this section on evil. So you're going to get it all, okay? All right, so here we go. I'd rather you pay attention and take notes. First, an accurate view of eternity. An accurate view of eternity. Look, as an atheist, I will tell you, I had a problem with the problem of evil. But as an atheist, I had a view of life, which was probably like most atheists have. You know, guys, remember your geometry? When you have a point and then a line that attaches to another point, that is called a line segment, right? And this is my view of life. From birth to death, cradle to grave, I want about 90 clean years. Be good, right? I want to drop dead in my sleep painlessly. Super healthy. I want to run a half marathon that morning, come home, have a great meal, go to bed, say, see you guys tomorrow, and just drop dead. That would be the best life, right? And you want 90 clean years because, after all, by the way, I complained earlier that I didn't get any good photographs of the first talk. So, okay. So this is my view of life. So that means, that was my view as an atheist, is that my family runs to about 90 years. I'm thinking I can do this clean 90 years. My grandfather died in his sleep, right? So the question then becomes, okay, well, that's my view. Now, look, if I would have gotten sick, let's say, with cancer at 40 and I suffered 10 years and then died, I would have been PO'd, okay, because that would have been bad. Why? And by the way, I would have seen that as an evil 10 years of suffering, pain and suffering that I should not have to experience. And the reason why it would bother me, of course, is because I would be losing this part that I expected. But remember, your expectations set up your joy. Whatever your expectations are is pretty connected to what you experience as joy. So here, I would have said, okay, this is evil. But here's the problem. What if I have a mistaken view, a mistaken foundational premise? What if life is not a line segment? What if life is actually a ray? If you remember, rays start at one point, go through the second point, then they go off infinitely in this direction. That view of life would change my experience of evil in this life. Here's what I mean. How many of you in this room had to suffer through a surgery, let's say, while you were an infant? Like you had some kind of corrective surgery as a baby. Raise your hand if you're one of those people. Okay, great. If I'd have stopped you guys in the middle of that first year and said, how is life going? You would say it sucks. It's terrible. It's terrible because I'm suffering. Life is not even worth living. But by the time you're like 4, you don't even remember the fact you had a surgery as an infant. Why? Because evil is always measured in the context of your life experience. That's how we measure and claim evil. You have an evil period, and you have the rest of your life, and you kind of measure it against each other. By the time you were 5 or 4, you were already over it. Now, it turns out that if life is actually a ray that goes off in this direction infinitely, that means that every year you're on the other side of the second dot, the span seems shorter. 1,000 years into eternity, your 90 years is short. 1,000,000 years into eternity, your 90 years is a millisecond. 90 million, this is an infinite array. It's going to go on infinitely. And the more it goes on in infinity, the smaller those first 90 years are. You think you forgot what happened in your infancy? Nothing you're experiencing here will even have that kind of impact on eternity. You could have the worst 90 years anyone has ever lived. But this is how we measure life. Keep eternity in mind. If the Christian worldview is true, we ought to have a different view about evil. When we have a view about evil, it sometimes exposes the fact that we're living like atheists. We think Christianity is true, but when it comes right down to it, we want everything in the first 90 years. That was never the promise, guys. From the beginning, life was described as this ray, and the two dots are so close together, I'm not sure in geometry what you could just call a dot with a line jumping off. That's all it is. It's like a dot. So this is one aspect you have to keep in mind when you're examining evil in your own life. Secondly, when we talk about evil, we have to have a proper reference, a frame of reference. Look, imagine these two scenarios. Here's a scenario. God is going to create a world in which love is possible. The other option is that God creates a world in which love is impossible. We say God's all loving. God is love. Okay, so do you think he's going to create a world then where love is possible? I think so. I think of these two options. God is aiming at this one, or this one rather, not this one. He wants it to be possible, not impossible. Does that make sense? Oh, you sure you want that kind of world? That's a crazy, dangerous world. You know, my wife and I, we got married on Valentine's Day, years ago. We've been together now. I met her when we were in high school. So I was 17 when I met my wife. She was 15. So we are celebrating our 43rd year anniversary this July. And I will tell you that if we broke up, let's say we broke up. And I wanted to win her back, so I wait till our anniversary on Valentine's Day, and I send her this amazing Valentine's Day card. Do you think this would do it? Do you think this would be enough to win her back? I think it would. Here it is. You will love me. Roses are red, bullets are lead. Take me back now or get shot in the head. I think that's one of the most romantic bits of prose and poetry I've ever seen. And that's not going to work, right? Because it turns out that love cannot be coerced. I said to my kids, do you love me? Do you love me? Yeah, I love you. I can't coerce that out of them. Also, I can't program it into them. Like my phone could tell me I love me every day. It doesn't really love me. It's just programmed to say that. It turns out that if you want to experience true love has to be offered freely. True love requires a dangerous prerequisite. It requires free agency. This is what this means. This means that I have to create a world in order for true love to emerge. I have to create a world in which you have the freedom to love and the freedom to hate. I cannot remove from you the freedom to hate, because if I did that, I'd be creating automatic robots who know nothing but love, which isn't genuine. There's a movie called Equilibrium. It's worth seeing. And it just talks about this world in which can we create a world in which no one has a choice. But then you don't experience real love. Is it worth it? You get rid of hate, but you also get rid of love. I don't know if it's worth it. So if you want a world in which love is possible, you have to create this dangerous world in which you have freedom. The freedom to hate. But it's not like God is so evil, he creates this world. He throws the knife at you. He doesn't even tell you how to catch the knife by the handle or the blade. No, God gives you this crazy thing you need, which is free agency. Then he gives you a guidebook so you will not misuse the crazy thing called free agency that he gave you. Now, many of us will refuse to read the guidebook. They refuse to obey the guidebook, and they misuse their free agency. That is not on God. If you want a world in which love can exist at all, you're going to have the knife. Does that make sense? And that means that some people are going to abuse it. It's just going to happen. Third thing, well, what do I mean when I say love? What is the definition of love? Most of us have this definition of love we got off Netflix. Like, love is these things. It's love and kindness. How many of you are parents? Raise your hand. You know there's a version of love that's missing from this list. And you might feel this towards your own kids, but at some point, you know they're going to get this. Tough love. Because you've got to get tough love if you want your kids to be loved. C.S. Lewis puts it this way. He says, we want, in fact, from God, not so much a father in heaven as a grandfather in heaven. You know, a senile benevolence who, as they say, like to see young people enjoying themselves and whose only plan for the universe was simply that it might be truly said at the end of each day, a good time was had by all. Look, I got a 33-year-old. I'm like, hey, when are the grandkids coming, dude? Okay, they've been married 5 years. If you ask me, time is up. They need to give me some grandkids now, okay? I got a 31-year-old. He just got married in October. I'll give him another 2 years. But that first couple, they need to start banging out some kids, okay? I'm serious. Why? Because I need to spoil them. I want to make my kids' lives miserable by spoiling their kids. This is what all of us want to do as grandparents. Like, we had that tough love period. Now I just want to spoil the dog snot out of you, right? I don't care. Okay, let's go back to our diagram of eternity again. Okay, so here's our life to the ray, and it goes off here infinitely. Okay. We all have what we call this part of the line segment, which is our temporal life, and this is our eternal life. Another way to say it might be that this is our earthly life, and this is our post-earthly life. Now look, we have earthly parents. And there are times as an earthly parent, you know it, I will allow my kids to experience some kind of misfortune which might appear to them to be evil because I am trying to accomplish a greater goal later on. I have to let you experience this so you can become the person you're going to need to be over here. And while you're in that, you're like, why would my parents allow me to suffer this way? Look, I've got a girl who's in college, and there are times when I know I want to send her money. I can see she's struggling. She's been in and out of college, but she's a great worker. She's a great kid. And I kind of want to, the car window won't roll down. She'll call me. I wanted to solve it for her. But when you make certain financial choices, you have to experience the outcome of your choices, or you never learn there's an outcome. So I can't just hop in every time and save her. I want to, but I don't. And if there's a God who governs all of this, including, look, what we'll typically see is like, well, Jim, yeah, but I've seen people suffer and then drop dead before anything good happened. Don't tell me God's trying to, well, look, you idiot. God is not limited by those 90 years. For all you know, God's trying to accomplish something over here. You don't know where he's trying. He has eternity to work with. You may not see it on this side of the grave, but you're not limited to the grave if you're a Christian. It turns out that he's working with this entire range. Does that make sense? And by the way, true love doesn't give a lick about your comfort. True love cares about your character. True love aims at something lasting. And that's what God's aiming at. And, as a Christian, I used to think this is the worst, as a non-Christian, this is the worst explanation Christians can offer. That there's a role in which we develop character through, really? So Auschwitz was about trying to develop character? Well, no, it's a cumulative case, but I get the problem. So I want to just discuss this role in character development for a second. I will tell you that as an atheist, these were the features of character that I wanted to see in my world. As an atheist, I want courage and compassion and forgiveness and self-sacrifice and charity to emerge. If I'm raising kids as an atheist, I want them to have those characters, those characteristics, right? You do too. Everyone loves these things. Really? You want your kids to have these things? You want people in the world to emerge with this level of character? Are you sure? Because how do you think you get those? You just flip the little genie switch and now you're courageous? No, these are not just things you switch on and switch off. This is what emerges in response to other things. You want courage? Oh, then you're going to have to endure something. Danger, that's going to give you courage. You want compassion? You're going to have to endure suffering. Oh, you want forgiveness? You're going to have something you have to forgive. Oh, you want self-sacrifice? You're going to have to deal with hardship. You want charity? You've got to respond to poverty. In other words, if you want those other characteristics to emerge in your world, you are going to have to design a world that looks like this. Oh, that's what he did. This is why, by the way, all character comes in response to hardship. You learn more in a season by losing those games than you did by winning the other ones. You know that. This is why I never personally pray for patience. Who does that? Oh, try that. Go ahead. Just go ahead and try that sometime. Pray for patience. You know what you're going to get? A hardship you got to be patient through. No, I don't pray for patience, okay? I don't need to suffer that. Lewis puts it this way: to ask that God's love should be content with us as we are is to ask that God should cease to be God. Because he is what he is. His love must, in the nature of things, be impeded and repelled by certain stains in our present character. And because he already loves us, he must labor to make us lovable. It is a labor. But there's a reason why he's doing it. Let's kind of round this corner now. We're almost to the end. A lot of this is about power and how it's used to draw us through. Most of the time, people, it's been said, when you hit the bottom, there's no place to look but up. And that is true, that hardship has the ability to draw us to God. I used to think, hey, if there's a real God and he wants to reach real people, well, why wouldn't he just come out and reach them? Don't need to make any big deal about it. Just speak to them in their ear. Really, they won't listen. Gosh, he's given us a word. I had that Bible. I could have bought a Bible. I never did. How many people do you know have a Bible in their house? They just let it sit there. It's not like he's not on radio shows all over the country. When I was working surveillance, I would try to find places on the radio dial where they weren't preaching the gospel. And it's not like I didn't have people in my life who weren't praying for me. If you ignore these ways that God communicates to you, don't be surprised when he finds a way to push you to himself. And it's usually through some form of hardship. You can let it be what you want. You can respond to the call, or you can wait till he kicks you in the butt. Which would you prefer? And he often does this. Lewis puts it this way: let me implore the reader to try to believe, if only for the moment, that God, who made these deserving people, may really be right when he thinks that their modest prosperity and the happiness of their children are not enough to make them blessed. We think it is. Let me just have stuff. Let me just be, no, that's not going to be enough to make you blessed. That all this must fall from you in the end. He must strip that from you in the end. And that if they have not learned to know him, they will be wretched. It's better to know God than to have all that stuff. And therefore he troubles them, warning them in advance of any insufficiency that one day they'll have to discover. The life to themselves and their families stands between them and the recognition of their need. Hear that for a second. The more comfortable you are, that comfort is standing between you and your need for God. You think you don't need him. Got everything I want. So what does he do? He makes that life a little less sweet to you. And you'll start looking for him. So don't think for a second that God does not use evil to draw people, because he does. Sometimes evil is just the result of you're stupid. I can't explain it any other way. You know, a loving God is a just God, but there are 3 forms of justice. And good parents learn how to exercise these 3 forms. And if God's a good parent, he's also going to exercise these 3 forms. Why would you be surprised? So these are the 3 forms of justice in our system. One looks backwards. That's called retributive justice. That's where, like, I'm just so mad. I'm going to punish you for doing that. We do a lot of that. There's some value in that. But it's backward looking. I'm going to punish you for something you did in the past. Now, there's also a form of justice that is forward looking, and this is called utilitarian justice. And this is when I'm mad at my kids for doing it. I'm mad that you took the car and did that. But the worst problem is that if you continue to drive like that, you'll be dead in 5 years. So because I'm worried about your future, I'm going to punish you for what you did in the past. It is future looking. It's not just about being angry about the past. It's about wanting to create a better future. And that is called utilitarian justice. And the last one is just called restorative justice. Sometimes people need to be paid back for the injustice you've paid them. And I think as God works in the world around us, and as you as loving parents, you try to exercise these 3 forms of justice with your own kids. You know you do. Maybe you never thought about it that way, but you're doing the same thing that I always did. And here, if God is one of those loving parents, he is going to do the same thing. And finally, it might just be that part of it is we are trying so hard to think like God when we are not. So it comes down to our limited understanding. Here's how I mean that. Epicurus puts it, remember I showed you the first way that Epicurus puts it, return to him right now. Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Well, then he's not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Well, then he's malevolent. So you can see the dilemma here and why he's positioning it this way. He's saying you can't have it both ways. If he is all loving and all powerful, he should be willing to do this and able to do it as well. And if this is all that God was, I could see this problem. I could see the problem in the way the argument is set up. But this is not all that, yes, this is part of what we as Christians think God is like, but it's not all of what God is like. So the first part here, is he willing to prevent evil but not able? This speaks of God's omnipotence. He is all-powerful. The second part speaks of his omnibenevolence. He is all-loving. But our God, as we classically understand him, is not just omnipotent and omnibenevolent. That's why this seems like, oh yeah, this is a good argument against God. You know why? Because you've mischaracterized God. This is not all that God is. God is also all-knowing. Oh, you left that part out. That's right, because this is what explains everything else. Let's go back to our timeline for a second. So here's our timeline as we talked about it before. This is the stuff that we know about. If you're lucky, you get some wisdom in this range, okay? But this is the stuff that God knows about. You think you know the connectivity between every human on planet Earth? You don't. You think you know what will happen when I push over one domino? You think you know what the 60,000th domino is going to fall? You don't, but God does. You think everything's just like 5 dominoes away. No, it's not. It's that butterfly syndrome, right? It's that butterfly effect. It's that you are going to cause all kinds of other issues by every single action you take every day. And you just don't understand the connectivity, but God understands that connectivity. So when you think, well, why would he allow Jackie to die that day? I think there's been a number of greater dominoes that have fallen because Jackie is not with us. And because Jackie has got an eternal life, she's been with God tear-free ever since. God would know the connectivity. There is a French Dominican priest who said it this way: if God could concede me his omnipotence for 24 hours, you would see how many changes I would make in the world. But if he gave me his wisdom too, I'd just leave things as they are. Because the wisdom explains the other 2 factors. Make sense? So in the end, we come down to this cumulative case, this cumulative explanation for evil. And by the way, just like the case with Jackie, some of these are going to, like in Jackie's case, some of those factors were larger, disproportionately larger factors than others, right? The role that her willingness to get in the car, that's of one size. The fact that she's in this neighborhood, that's of another size. Well, the same thing is true in any act of evil. So if you said, why did this happen that way? I'd say, well, I know here are the reasons why God might allow it, but there will be some proportions I'm not sure of. That's part of the mystery of solving a case. In this case, it's part of the questions you will have to ask God when we get there. And there's some connectivity here. I can't tell you what those are. That's too hard to, I don't know what only God would know this connectivity. But I guarantee you it's going to be something like this, and then all of these factors together are going to explain that particular act of evil. Does that make sense? And by the way, why are you calling it evil to begin with? Because you don't like it? Really? Is that what it comes down to? All evil is just a matter of opinion? Is there anything, truth this morning? Oh, it's all a matter of personal opinion. Your truth, my truth, their truth. Is that true for evil? Is torturing babies for fun a matter of personal opinion? If it is, well, then I can't really judge somebody who says, I'm okay with torturing babies for fun. Well, because all moral claims are grounded in people, right? He's no less a person than she is. He thinks it's okay. She says it's not okay. I can't adjudicate between those two because all moral truths are grounded subjectively in subjects. Oh, no, it's our culture. Our culture says it's not okay. Oh, really? So this group says it's okay to torture babies for fun. This group says it's not. How do I adjudicate between those? Whether it's one subject or a group of subjects, torturing babies for fun is not a matter of subjective opinion. It's objectively evil. I've got just enough time to tell you this. Look, there's 2 kinds of truth. Subjective truth claims and objective truth claims. Okay? Subjective truth claims are a matter of personal opinion of a subject or subjects. Objective claims are based in the object. In other words, I could say, I like PowerPoint clickers. That's my personal view about the object. I get to make that decision. I like them. This is a PowerPoint clicker. Well, that's grounded in the object, not in my opinion. I cannot make this a car by having a view that it's a car. It is grounded in the object known as the clicker. Are moral truths that way? Yeah, it turns out they are. Because if they aren't, if they're grounded in opinions, then you got to be okay with what Hitler did. You got to be okay with it because that group said it was, as a group, it was okay. If a group says it's okay, then we better start bending our knee to whatever China wants us to do. They're the larger group. Now, we would say there are some truths that transcend groups. It's never okay to torture babies for fun. That is objectively evil. Oh, really? So that's what you think? Evil is objective? How do you get that? Lewis puts it this way. My argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? If you think it's just when it's unjust, your line is crooked to begin with. You're just comparing it to your own line. But if there's an objectively straight line out there that you are measuring against to see this is crooked, where's the objective straight line coming from? It requires God as the highest moral standard before you can even identify evil. God is the objective straight line by which we measure the crooked line. If it just comes from us, then there's no crooked line. Every line is crooked. Do you see the problem? Objective moral truths, objective truth, are an evidence for God's existence, including objective truths about evil. Now, we started off with this, and we said, can we stay in the room? Now, the complaints are you can't get it with God because, God, he can't exist if there's evil in the room. That's the complaint. But it turns out, and that's what they'll say, that God's existence cannot be reconciled with the presence of evil. But it turns out without God as the standard of righteousness, you can't call anything evil. It's just a matter of opinion. You want all evil to go away? Change your opinion. Doesn't work that way. It turns out you need the objective standard in order to call something evil to begin with, so evil ends up being an evidence for the existence of God who is outside the physical world. Because you cannot determine what's evil from just what's in the room. Humans cannot do it. It takes a standard outside of humanity. Lewis says, of course, I could have given up my idea of justice by saying it was nothing but a private idea of my own. But if I did that, then my argument against God collapsed too. For the argument depended on saying that the world was really unjust, not simply that it did not happen to please my private fancies. So the standard of good, that's what we call evil by comparing to the standard of good, must exist in order for evil to exist. Now, I want to show you before I leave you, because we're down to the last few minutes, this is part of the overall case for God's existence. So I started off with that guy in the room. Well, these are the 8 features of the universe that have to be explained by either staying in the room. I think the best explanation is outside the room. And if the best explanation for this is outside the room, then I know I have an intruder. And I can tell you that every case I work, before I meet the guy who did this, I start to develop a suspect profile about what I expect to meet based on the evidence that's in the room. So here I've got this evidence, right? And I can actually develop a suspect profile from the evidence. Give you an example of this. If I've got 2 kinds of murders at work, one is a murder at a, do you know what an AM/PM is? Do you guys have AM/PM? Let's see, 7-Eleven? Okay, so it's at a 7-Eleven, and I have someone killed behind the counter. All the money's taken from the register. That's one. Or the same guy is killed, but he's not killed at the 7-Eleven. He is killed in his bedroom where he is stabbed 70 times in the groin. Which case do you want? I want the bedroom case. Why? Because in the 7-Eleven, where he shot for the money in the register, anyone could have done that. But do you think, I'm guessing the person who stabbed him in his bedroom 70 times in his private parts probably knows this dude. So my suspect pool is much smaller, right? Who could be so angry he wants to do that or she wants to do that to him? Give me that case. That's an easier case to work because I can develop a suspect profile based on the kind of murder it is. Make sense? So here I've got this evidence in the universe, and I got to explain it to someone. I got a suspect in view, and it's not Mick Jagger because Mick Jagger cannot accomplish all of these things. Or Justin Bieber, or whoever's been arrested in the last 30 years. I'm looking for certain attributes based on the evidence. I'm looking for a suspect that is outside of space, time, and matter, is capable of fine-tuning the universe, is actually intelligent and communicative enough to form DNA and biology, and is creative enough to account for design and biology, is a mind that creates in its own image other minds that act freely, and that understand and recognize him as the source of objective truth, including moral truth, and is the standard of righteousness by which we judge anything and call it evil. That's not Mick Jagger. But that is the classic definition of God. And I can get there without ever opening a page of Scripture. And in God's crime scene, I'm only using science and philosophy to make a case for God's existence in 4 different types. By the way, when you have 4 different types, here's 2 of these are cosmological, 2 of these are biological, 2 of these are mental, and 2 of these are moral. And when you have different kinds of evidence pointing to the same conclusion, that's probably a reasonable inference. And let me tell you what defense attorneys do. They're so clever. They'll say when you get to trial, well, I see you have 8 pieces of evidence against my suspect, but I can think of other ways to explain that piece. And I can think of other ways to explain this piece, and other ways to explain all of these pieces. And they'll offer all of these alternative explanations for your 8 pieces of evidence. Same thing happens in the case when it comes to God. Oh, you got a universe that begins to exist? Well, there's a couple theories about that. Here's a theory, here's a theory, here's a theory, here's a theory, and none of them work, which is why there's more than one theory. If one of these theories worked, they wouldn't offer a second theory. They keep on offering theories because this guy knows this guy's theory doesn't work. This guy knows he doesn't work. They don't agree with each other because none of these work. And they do this over and over and over again. So maybe it's just possible that, we got really dumb lucky and all these crazy explanations might account for these 8 pieces of evidence. That's one way to see the case. There's another way to see the case. What if all 8 pieces could be explained by a single unified cause? Which of these 2 answers seems more reasonable? Incredible dumb luck where none of the explanations actually work, or one unified explanation? Which one makes more sense? So I don't think it's this first one. It's just too unlikely. Now, I will tell you, we've been looking for a theory of everything in physics for some time now, how to marry ideas from macrophysics into ideas from quantum mechanics and quantum physics. How do we make these? Is there one theory that would explain all of it? Yes, I'm here to tell you today I've discovered the theory of everything. It is God, okay? Pretty simple. That's the theory that answers everyone's questions. Of course, they refuse to look, and that's what we're trying to write about in that book. They refuse to look there, but that's what we're writing about. And by the way, one last thing. Science right now, in this century, wants to ask, it doesn't ask all 6 investigative questions. Science asks 5 of the 6 questions. When you're working in an investigation, you have to ask all 6. What, when, how, why, where. But if I ask the what, when, how, why, where questions and I stop right there, no one's going to go to jail. Because I failed to ask the 6th question. Who? What, when, how, why, where, who? Science refuses to ask the who question. Out of bounds. There are no who's as answers in science. Really? What if I've got information in the DNA and information in our practical experience always comes from mind? You never get information from a what, a how, a when, a why, or a how. You need who's for information. Don't care. Can't be a who. Why? Because who's are out of bounds. I get it, but why are they out of bounds? They just are. For the entire history of science, they were never out of bounds until this generation. So I just want you to remember that we want to do the most robust view of science. I'm willing to answer the other 5 questions. I'm not going to default to a who if a what is a better answer. But just allow me to ask a who question. It should not be out of bounds. And that's why the who is the best answer to the theory of everything. But they don't want to look at it because there's no who's allowed anymore. Let's pray. Father, thank you for great sessions, for a great audience who's eager to learn more about you, and for the opportunity to explore you with our minds as a form of worship. Take this day and all that we've thought about and all that we've pursued and wrestled with and see it as our act of devotion and worship to you, Father. And we pray this in the name of your heavenly, amazing, unparalleled impact Son, Jesus Christ. And everyone here says, Amen. Thanks, guys.